Good morning and welcome to Fire in the Belly. Today we have this boardroom talk, and again we're back with the outstanding Pat Slattery. So today we've put another challenge to Pat to talk about a little topic, and that topic today is responsibility. And just curious to know, in terms of the really sort of all about responsibility, the power, the polarity of it, and the price or cost of it as well. So Pat's had all of about 24 hours to think about this. So maybe, I don't know whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. So Pat, yeah, good morning. Thank you for coming on again.
Thanks, Pete. Great to be here. And you're right, yeah, less than 24 hours possibly. But you know what? I mean, I think for me, Pete, and I think what we're hoping to do here and what we intend to do is to try and simplify it as much as we possibly can in terms of what responsibility means and identifying responsibility and maybe the changes that may have to come, or the importance of responsibility. But for me, it's just about, look, let's answer it in the most simplistic way that I can answer it. And again, I want to point out that these are just my opinions when it comes to these topics. And, we encourage people to maybe question them themselves, for themselves as well. So, so again, if we, I suppose, we crack on, will we crack on, Peter?
Absolutely, yeah. So I'm just, well, first things first is what does responsibility mean to you?
Responsibility means to me, I think, is to be responsible, which tells me I have the ability to respond to anything that goes on in my life, and I am responsible for how I respond. And again, when I think about being responsible, it means I'm allowing myself the ability to choose how I respond for me. And I think it's really important for people to understand. Again, for me, it's important to know that only I can choose to be responsible. And for anybody who's watching or listening here, only you can choose to be responsible. Now, as we get through today, we'll talk a little bit more about this, and we go a little bit more in depth and maybe give some examples that people can resonate with. But again, I want people to really understand that only you can choose to be responsible. You can only choose how you respond to whatever's going on in your life, whatever's gone on in the past, whatever's going to happen in the future. Okay. But I will say to you, I remember way back many years ago, again, I quote Jim Rohn quite a bit, and some lessons I learned from Jim Rohn, and the idea of responsibility and the accepting full responsibility being one of the highest forms of human maturity, is accepting full responsibility. So, a question I could ask you, Pete, I mean, do you feel that you have full responsibility for your life, that you can take full responsibility for your life? And
in all honesty, I probably didn't used to. I think working with yourself and working with, even myself and going through it, I've realized it's, life happens because of me and around me and what I do, as opposed to waiting for it to happen. So it's happened, it's changing, and that's moving over. So that's kind of where I feel I'm at anyway.
Okay, well, congratulations then, because you've just graduated into adulthood, right? Because the reality is, guys, when some people will say that once you accept full responsibility for your life, that is confirmation that you've passed the test. You've passed the test into adulthood, because now you're responsible for yourself. We understand that as youngsters, as kids growing up, that there's a level of learning, there's a level of misunderstanding in some ways for children, and they have to get to a certain point where they grow up, right, and move on with their own life and take control of their own life and take responsibility for everything. So when people say that you're taking full responsibility for your own life, then they say, yeah, but congratulations, you've graduated into adulthood. So you're now officially an adult. Okay, no going back. And we put again, the other part that I want people to understand is when you choose to be fully responsible and you accept full responsibility, the one thing you're going to have to learn to do is you're going to have to learn how to get out there and accept all the things that you want in this world, all the things that you feel that you need for yourself, by the way. But you can do this without apology. Every time you receive something that's really good, every time you achieve something that's really good in this world, and you put in the work and you put in the effort in you reap what you sow, right? When you go out there and you accept and receive all that is good in your life, all the things that you work really hard for, it's really important that you learn to do this without apology, and also without complaint if you don't. And that kind of sums up responsibility for me. So, and yet I see so many people when they feel responsible, and we'll talk a little bit more about this as we go on, so people get a bit more of an understanding. But when you learn to accept without apology when you do well, and without complaint when you do, that's taking responsibility for your actions, for your decisions, for your outcomes. And outcomes to me are what's going to be important. Now, again, we'll talk a lot about choice and understanding the importance of choice, because you have a choice on every single thing you do, and every choice you make is a consequence. So it's really important that you take responsibility for all of those choices. So, more long list of reasons. So let's talk about responsibility. When things don't work out, right? So when we talk about, accepting things without apology when they do, and without complaint if they don't. But when things don't really work out, most people have a really long list, especially when things don't work out, because the reason they have this list is they feel that they need to explain themselves so they don't look bad, right? Something didn't happen. Okay, well, here's the government. You don't realize the government in my country, what we're doing to us, right? So here are the reasons. There's one: circumstances. Circumstances didn't allow me to go after what it was. My family didn't believe in me. My spouse doesn't believe in me. They didn't give me the encouragement. My friends kept laughing at me every time I come up with this idea or this goal. I had bad teachers. My teachers just didn't understand me, right? My boss is not a nice person. Right, so my boss doesn't give me a break. And anyway, the weather is terrible. And then the people I work with are terrible people. And on the way here this morning, the traffic was notorious. Right? And then, sure, look, we're coming into recession, the economy, we're in trouble. And then maybe you talk about the community of people that you surround yourself with. So most people find reasons to blame. And when we find reasons to blame, this is back to the polar opposite, right? The irresponsibility. So it's kind of hard. It's difficult to talk just about responsibility without talking about the polars at the same time, right? So we have to kind of recognize the irresponsibility and the responsibility factors when we're going to discuss this. So when you start thinking about this, most people find reasons to blame when things don't work out, simply because they feel the need to explain themselves so they don't look bad. Isn't that amazing? And most people will say, when you're in this space, and most people tell you that they're quite comfortable or in control or in charge, yet they still feel the need to explain themselves so they don't look bad. So therefore, part of that is judgment. Maybe they bring judgment in to play here when it comes to responsibility. And because they don't feel like they're stacking up to everybody else, they'll find reasons to blame. Now, some people, by the way, have a huge list. Right, a huge list. I've met many people over many, many years. I've worked with lots of people, and I can go back, if I'm quite honest, and I'll take responsibility here and tell you that in one time in my life, I had a huge list, much longer than we could cover here today, Pete. Right, I could go on and on and on with the list. But I did learn something, and I believe it was from Jim Rohn that I learned this. That the problem with most of the lists that people have is that they're not on them. Right, they're not on them. And I had to realize for me that, I could go on and complain, and I could be in the blame game for a long time. But if I'm going to take responsibility, then my name needs to be on that list. Now, I'm going to be as respectful as I possibly can for people in here who are watching this today. But you did ask me to come on and speak the truth. Right? So the truth is all I'm going to give you. So I will say to most people, when you go back and look at that list of all the things that are going wrong in your life, the things that are not allowing you the opportunity, as you believe, to be the best version of yourselves, make sure you're on that list too, because ultimately the choice stops with you. Okay? Ultimately the choice stops with you. Usually when people feel challenged, or they don't have the answer, or maybe they don't like the answer, they go back to the list. So I've met people who introduce change into their lives by taking responsibility for their actions, or being responsible, right? Choosing the ability to respond to whatever is going on in their lives. And sometimes on that journey, something happens again that just throws you off track. And when people get thrown off track, they go back to the list. Right now, we often say, people say this is back to making excuses, right? You can call them excuses, and we often talk about excuses, and we talk about kids being experts at it, right? Kids are experts at excuses. And when I say that, when most people laugh and they think, yeah, they are actually, I say, yeah, but where did they learn it from? They did, as we would say here in Ireland, and where I come from, is they didn't lick it off a stone, right? So where did they learn it from? And the reality is, in my opinion, usually when people feel challenged or they don't have the answer, or maybe they don't like the answer, they go back to the list. Okay. So for example, people might say, hey, Pat, how come you haven't done very much in your life up to now? You haven't traveled much and you don't even seem to have a nice car, etc., etc. And we could go on, right? And here's my answer. Well, you see, I come from a community that doesn't create very much opportunity. Although I was lucky to get this job. So maybe I was lucky to get this job, but this job doesn't pay me too well and my boss doesn't really care. So it's not been possible for me to have much of what I really want. People start putting meat on those excuses, on those things on their list. And I could go on and on and on with this, but I'm going to suggest to people right now is tear up that list, rip it up. Tear up the list, rip it up and get rid of it. And remind yourself, and I'm sure you've heard this before, if it is to be, it is up to me. If it is to be, it is up to me. Now, I also want to remind you of something when it comes to responsibility. I believe it was the great Stan Lee from the Spider-Man copybooks who said, with great responsibility comes great power. With great power comes great responsibility, right? And I will say this to everybody. Everybody has the power to be, do, and have whatever they want. Everybody. Therefore, everybody has great responsibility too. And you can choose your outcomes. You can choose to be responsible. To be responsible. To be able to do whatever it is you need to do to respond to whatever happens in your life. So if you decide that it is a be up to me, you will also decide that it is not what happens that determines the quality of your life. Now, what happens, we talk about what happens, okay? We also have to understand what happens actually happens to almost everybody. The things that happen to you, the things that have happened to allow you to respectfully shun the responsibility happens to almost everybody. It just doesn't happen to the poor people, the poor me. It happens to almost everybody. And once you understand that, you can choose differently. And I have a story, and maybe you've heard it before, of two brothers who grew up in a very tough environment where their dad was a raving alcoholic. He was abusive and aggressive and never provided for the family. And as these two brothers grew up, one of them became truly successful, and one of them ended up being an alcoholic and living on the streets. And when both brothers were interviewed, they went to the guy on the streets and they asked him, how did this happen to you? How did you end up on the streets? And he said, well, let me tell you a story. And it's a story of my dad. When I grew up, my dad was an alcoholic. He was abusive. He never provided much for us. We had to fend for ourselves. He said, so living up in that environment, he said, of abuse, of alcoholism, he said, sure, what else was I going to do? So then when they went to interview the other brother who was truly successful and very, very successful, and they asked him, how did you become so successful? And he said, let me tell you a story. It's a story of my dad. He said, when I grew up, my dad was an alcoholic. He never provided for us. He never done much for my mom or for me or my family. He never provided. He left us to go out and do it on our own. So what else was I going to do? So what I want you to understand, whatever happens to almost everybody. So it's not what happens, is what you do. And what happens is about the same for all people. It is what is done by different people that determines different outcomes. And I repeat that, it is what is done by different people that determines different outcomes. There is nobody out there smarter than you. There's nobody out there more capable than you of being the best you. Once you take responsibility. Now, most people I have met in my entire life, and I have met hundreds of thousands of people actually, hundreds of thousands of people. And almost everybody I've had a conversation with have lost in some way. Things do happen to everyone. But taking responsibility is doing something about it. No excuses. So I'm going to suggest that starting today, what are you going to do that will make a difference? Because once you choose to do something, you are taking responsibility. Now, again, I want to be respectful when I say to people that wherever you're at right now is a direct result of a decision or a choice that you either made or did not make 5 years ago. And by making that choice, you're responsible for your outcomes today. Or by not making that choice, you're responsible for your outcomes today, wherever you're at. Now, that doesn't always have to be a bad thing, by the way. So don't go looking for the bad. Get rid of the list, remember? But I will say this to you too. Wherever you're going to be 5 years from now will be determined by what you choose to do today. Now, the understanding of that is this is where you have to take on that responsibility to be responsible, to be able to respond to whatever is going on in your life, to be able to respond for whatever may happen in the future, good or bad. So it is choice time. Because when it comes down to responsibility for me, responsibility to me is all about choice. What choices am I making today that are going to determine the outcomes for my life? I'm also responsible for the choices I made in the past and the outcomes that I've received in the past or came my way in the past. Now, I know there's going to be people who are going to challenge some of what I'm saying here based on past experiences and things that may happen in the past. And maybe I'll touch on that a little later as we get through this. But I want you to understand one thing. Actually, I'm going to suggest for those who are listening here or watching this, write this down. It is nice to know that any day you wish, you can change your whole life. It is nice to know that any day, if you wish, you can change your whole life. So what can you start doing today to make a difference to your life? Now, most people say to me, oh, okay, when you ask that question, they go, well, what can I do with the economy? Here's what happens. They go back to the list. Right? When you ask the question, your brain is hardwired, right? Your brain has been hardwired. You've got a whole series of habits up to now that keep bringing you back to the list. So usually when I say that to people, they go, yeah, well, that's okay for you. That's okay for you, right? What can I do? What can I do about the economy? What can I do with the economy? What can you do if you have no money to do what you want to do? What if no one believes in you or encourages you? What can you do if your boss is not a good person? And I can tell you what you can do is you can reach down inside yourself and find reasons to change. If you find yourself going back to the list, which most people will do, you're going to reach deep down inside yourself and find reasons to change. Now, people go, geez, that seems a bit harsh, Pat, you know. I mean, you could show a little bit more empathy or a little bit more compassion, and I do. And that's when they come in the TLC, right? Everybody wants a little bit of TLC. And in the past, I wanted TLC too. So when I want people to write down the words TLC or the letters TLC, and what does TLC now mean to me? TLC is what I call 3 choices. You can take it, you can leave it, or you change it. I choose to change it because I choose to be responsible. So when you find yourself going back to the list, show yourself a little bit of TLC. You deserve that. Everybody deserves a little TLC, right? So go back to your list and look at it. Every time you do, go back to your TLC. Ask yourself, am I going to take this and accept that this is the way it is? That's a choice. Am I going to leave it? Am I just going to run away and pretend it never happens? That's also a choice. Or am I going to change it? I choose to change it. What do you choose? Because changing it is taking responsibility. It's allowing me the ability to respond to whatever has happened, whatever is going on. And I can do whatever I need to do in order to make it happen, whatever it needs to me. So can you. You can do whatever it takes for it to happen for you, whatever it means, as long as you take responsibility and accept that you can be, do, and have anything you want if you're provided you are prepared to change. Excuse me. So now the other thing is, when you're on this journey, you are also given responsibility when it comes to conversations. Every single conversation you have with every single person comes responsibility. Now, what do I mean by that? Because most people are communicators, right? They like to communicate. And therefore, they communicate what they hear or what they believe they hear. And most people communicate what they believe to be the truth without any proof. So you have a responsibility for your communication. So I'm sure maybe you've heard of this before, but you got to think about what it is you're sharing. And if you use the word think and you write down the word think, T-H-I-N-K, think, you have to think about what it is you're communicating. First is the T, which means, is it true? Is what you're about to share, is it true? Is it true about the person you're sharing information about? Is it true for the person who's on the receiving end? Is it true? Is it knowledge that's knowledge? Is it information that you're sharing that's true? Because you have a responsibility also for what you share. We may call this moral responsibility. So is it true? H, is it helpful? Is it helpful to the people you're sharing this information with? And I think in current times, this may be very poignant. Is it helpful? Is the information you're sharing, is it helpful? The I, is it inspiring? Is it inspiring people to be the best, to bring the best out in them? Is it inspiring people to change? And is it necessary? Do people really need to know? Is it necessary to help people moving forward in life for them to get a better understanding of what's going on in life? Is it necessary? And lastly, the K, is it kind? Is it kind information? Is it making a positive difference? And so think about what it is that you're doing. Think about the information that you're sharing. Think about your moral responsibility before you share it. Is it true? Is it helpful? Is it inspiring? Is it necessary? Is it kind? So think. Because also knowledge comes great responsibility, right? Knowledge is, if we were to believe that knowledge is power, then we have to believe if Stan Lee says, with great power comes great responsibility. And it is, because the information that you share can often impact other people who don't understand that they are responsible. So I think for me, my goal and my job is to share information which allows other people to become responsible, that they can be able to respond in a positive way to whatever's going on in the world, in life, in their environment, their economy, whatever. So the other thing we are responsible for is self-control. Now, when we think about self-control, the one thing I always get people that, you may have heard me say this many times, is your past does not equal your future. And if we are going to take control, then we have to take control of what we do now, what we believe now, how we respond to whatever's going on in the world. Now, we can also be responsible for being proactive in choosing what we want. So it's not always just about being reactive. I want to clarify that, when we talk about being responsible, it's not always about being reacting to whatever's going on in the world. We can also be proactive. We can be responsible for being proactive. And when you have information and knowledge that you can share, that can change people's lives, change people's businesses, change, people's beliefs sometimes, or at least allow them the ability to question their own beliefs, then you have a responsibility to focus on the future and to do whatever it takes for you to have a better future, and the better future of those around you. Again, maybe that's comes under moral responsibility as well. I remember when I worked with Mark Victor Hansen, right? Mark is co-author for Chicken Soup for the Soul. And we spent a long time talking. We had a very intimate conversation. And he did say this to me. He shared this with me quite a long time ago. And ironically, I was speaking with another friend of mine, a speaker in Dallas, in Texas, recently. And he shared this story with me. And it was so funny because he had more or less the same conversation with Mark Victor Hansen and Jack Canfield as I did. And he said, you have a moral responsibility. Now, the information that I'm sharing here with you today, once I share this information with you today, it's no longer mine. But let me tell you something, it's no longer yours either. You have a moral, if something resonates with you here, if something sits with you and you get an understanding here of what we're talking about and how it can impact people's lives in a positive way, then let me tell you this, you have a moral responsibility to share it. You can choose not to, but you're also responsible for that. But I believe that people have a moral responsibility to share this information. And I remember having this conversation with Mark. And he said, Pat, he said, you have knowledge. You said, you have knowledge that the world needs to know. So the world needs to take responsibility or know how they can take responsibility for their own actions, their own choices, their own outcomes. He said, and you have a moral responsibility to share that. He said, but I said, you have a moral responsibility to yourself first. And he said, and I can assure you, if you take on the responsibility of sharing this knowledge, he said, you would grow as a human being. And you have a moral responsibility to allow yourself to keep growing. He said, you also have a moral responsibility to your family. So he said, you got to get out there and be the best. You got to play to your best and be your best, unapologetically. You got to receive the things in this life, in this world that you truly want, unapologetically. And this is something I really want to resonate with people who are watching today or listening today or reading this, is you have to make a choice to go out into the world and be, do, and have. You have a moral responsibility to do this, to receive everything that you want unapologetically, because you deserve it. You have a moral responsibility to society, and that will also get met by taking the responsibility of being the best you can be, because you're going to inspire people. You're going to inspire people to step up. And you have a moral responsibility to your environment by being the best you can be and allowing the people in your environment to believe in themselves too. I choose to take that responsibility, and I choose to take it seriously. But I also choose to have fun along the way and enjoy life. But I take that responsibility very seriously. And I believe I go out every single day and I make choices that I know will be responsible for greater outcomes for people who choose to take their own responsibility and participate. Also, when we look at responsibility, there's a level of accountability. You have to be responsible for your accountability. How do you hold yourself to account? Now, this is not about judgment. right? Because when people hear the word accountability, they go, oh, they're being judged, they're judging me again. This is not about judgment. Accountability is about holding yourself to account, being able to measure and test and see what you're doing to make sure that you're on the right track, to keep you on track, to make sure that you are being truly responsible, that you're doing and being the best as you can be. Because we do know that if you throw away your list, somebody's going, hang on till I show you mine, right? So we know that life will get in the way sometimes. So you are responsible for accountability. You have a responsibility to be honest as much as honest as you can possibly be. And, you know, when I say that very carefully, by the way, because I know people say there's no such thing as a white lie, etc., etc. But I choose that when somebody is sharing something with me, I choose when to be honest. Because if I'm honest to somebody and it's going to hurt somebody, then that to me, I'm not going to be responsible for creating that pain. I choose to manage that honesty too. But I know when I come and I want to speak to you about my life and where I'm at, I'm going to just speak from my truth. I'm going to be honest with myself. That's the most important person to be honest with, is yourself. Then you have a responsibility on diligence. You got to do your due diligence on life, on everything. You have a responsibility to check things out, make sure it sits well, to question everything. Question everything I'm saying here today and see how it sits with you. So you got to be diligent. One, about, checking things out to make sure it sits well, to make sure it is happening with good intent and it's something that you want to be involved in. Then, when we talk about being diligent, about getting it done, taking responsibility to get stuff done. I know you've heard me say many times, when things need to get done, if it's easy, do it easy. If it's hard, do it hard. Just get it done. Then you are responsible for your roles. What roles you're playing in this universe is your responsibility. What role are you playing in other people's lives? What role are you playing when it comes to making a difference? You're responsible for all of those. You're responsible for your self-direction. And I say self-direction because ultimately it's always your choice. Always your choice. You can take information, you can take knowledge, you can take advice, you can take suggestions. But ultimately, you are responsible for your self-direction. You can choose to say no. You are responsible for your health. And you're also responsible for change. So again, go back to showing yourself a little bit of TLC. You can take it, you can leave it, or you can change it. Now, here's something I researched something because I wanted to share this with you. I was trying to think of how can I share this, because I've seen some things happen many times, particularly in groups and people and lots of people I work with, and study human behavior for a long time, Pete, right? And I was trying to find, okay, how can I translate this? So I'm going to share with you something called the diffusion of responsibility. And maybe let's see if anybody who's watching or listening or reading this recognizes something about themselves. Now, the diffusion of responsibility occurs when people who need to make a decision wait for somebody else to act instead. So the more people involved, the more likely it is that each person will do nothing, believing that someone else from the group will actually respond first. So to give you an example in this, I'm going to share with you a study that was carried out by the University of Texas. The experiment was set up where a distress call was made, so it appeared that a person nearby suffered an injury. When people heard the cry and thought that they were the only ones that heard the cry, 87% of them helped. Now, the same number of people studied, when they thought that one other person heard the same cry for help, only 62% of the people helped. And those that thought that 4 other people heard the cry for help, only 31% of people took action. So the diffusion of responsibility makes people feel less pressure to act because they believe correctly or incorrectly that someone else will do it. So when people do not feel responsible for a situation, they feel less guilty when they do nothing to help. So in a way, the diffusion of responsibility keeps people from paying attention to their own conscience. Now, let's see if anybody recognizes this. Maybe you're in a group format, a group meeting, networking, whatever you're doing within a group. And somebody says, would you like to introduce yourselves? Who'd like to go first? Most people go, well, there's a group of people here. I'll sit back and let somebody go first. The bigger the group, the less people are prepared to take action. And I've seen this many times. And I've also seen, as it's going on, I see people putting their head down, hoping they won't be recognized. Don't call me yet. I'm not ready yet. Yeah, if it's a one-to-one, and I say, hey, Pete, tell me about yourself, instantly you're going to come in and tell me. You take responsibility for making the introduction, of stepping up and telling us about who you are. So when we understand what's going on in terms of responsibility, there are multiple things that get in the way. One is your list, right? Maybe it's a story of your past. And every time you go back to the story of the past, the things that didn't work out, then we just add to that list. Then, of course, you have that diffusion of responsibility where, well, if somebody else is going to do it, I won't have to bother. And you pay maybe less attention and you don't have to deal with it. You don't feel so guilty because you didn't. So I'm just going to suggest that you check yourself and see where you fit in that one. Are you the person? Now, we also know there are people who will respond, who will take responsibility immediately, no matter what. People who will take responsibility immediately because maybe they've just created a completely different set of habits. Now, there's also the taking your eyes off your responsibility, what that could mean. Taking your eyes off responsibility is back to, again, this simple story I came across where a shepherd and his sheep. And if the shepherd decides, you know what, I'm tending to the sheep, and decide, you know what, I'm going to take a break, I'm going to take a rest. I decide to lie down under a tree and take a sleep. Well, it's a possibility that if the flock of sheep, the 2 or 3 of those sheep, could wander off and tip over a cliff, disappear. And then when they wake up, they could blame everything else and anything that's going on. But the reality is they shunned their responsibility or took their eyes off their responsibilities. So what could that mean to you? Now, if I'm too busy and if you're too busy observing others, then maybe you're taking your eyes off of your responsibility. So again, going back to sharing information or pointing a finger, or in some cases, people talk about competition, right? So if you're in business and you're keeping in mind what everybody else is doing, you can't take your eyes off of other people. Are you shunning your own responsibility? So if I was to sit here and go, oh, well, that Pete Longton guy, wait until I tell you about him. You know what he done? You know what he's doing? You know this guy hasn't, and I could go off into all of this. And I'm trying to push my responsibility or my outcomes. And I'm going to say, well, Pete Longton is responsible because he done a podcast and said very nice things about me, and he's this and that and everything else. But I mean, am I actually too busy observing other people without observing my responsibility? And again, if you notice people, you hear people talk about parents, they passing judgment on other people. They're not great parents, they're not this, they could be doing that. Oh, geez, their little lad is out running around without a jacket on, just freezing cold. I wouldn't let my little Johnny out without it. And the reality is, Johnny probably needs to take off the jacket and get out in the cold and let his body get a feel for weather and maybe build up a bit of immunity. Who knows? Who knows? But we can't pass judgment and push what we believe is a responsibility on other people. Everybody chooses their own. Now, when it comes to business, and I know you know this because you heard me say this many times, I don't believe I have any competition. I don't give much thought to competition in any way, shape, or form. I am only responsible for what I do. I'm not responsible for what competition do or what other people say. I'm only responsible for what I do. So I focus on my responsibility, and I do what I do, and I believe what I do best. Therefore, there is no such thing. There are other people who do something similar to what I do. They do it in their way, I do it my way. But I am responsible for my way, and I choose to be the best. So therefore, I pay no attention to what other people are doing. So again, I take full responsibility for my outcomes. Now we can also look at our current situation. And I don't watch the news. I'm not judging anybody who does. But I meet people and I see people, and I know some people who will protest against anything. Anything. And I watch the news and they have issues with every single politician. I'm not saying, by the way, the politicians are good. I'm not saying they're bad. I'm not saying anything. I am responsible for my thoughts about who they are and what they do and what they're capable of. But I am not allowing them the opportunity to choose my future. I'm responsible for that. So when you start looking at it, paying and observing other people, are you spending too much time observing other people when you could be taking responsibility for your own decisions, your own choices, regardless of what's going on out there in the world, regardless of what the politicians are doing or not doing? How are you playing your part? And that's the question I ask myself always. And here's a little tip for you. You might not want to hear it, but I just got to share the truth. Your politicians are not going to bail you out. Your government isn't going to bail you out. So it's time to step up into adulthood and take more responsibility for you, for yourself. Whatever that means to you, you know the choices that you have to make in order for you to have the outcomes that you really want to have. That sounds a little bit harsh, I understand, but I know if I am spending my time observing other people, I'm not being responsible for my outcomes. Therefore, I choose not to observe unless it's something that sits really well with me and is inspiring me to keep moving forward. And I'm going to suggest that you do the same. And that's a suggestion. It's not advice. You can choose your own advice based on the suggestions that we make. So what I'm not observing, and when I'm not observing and I'm not comparing, then my life is a lot better. Most people, and I mean most people that I've met, live in a world of comparisons. They're comparing themselves. And when you start comparing yourselves to other people, you start judging yourself again. And I believe personally that is irresponsible. It's irresponsible to judge yourself. It doesn't matter if you make a mistake. Everybody makes mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes. But you again have the ability to change. You have the ability to do something different, whatever it takes to change. But everybody makes mistakes. You're going to make more. So get over it. You're going to make more mistakes. Welcome them, welcome what you're going to learn from them, and take responsibility for how you choose to change. Again, if you focus on your own responsibility, then you don't have to comment or focus on the lack of responsibility of others. Because remember here, what you think about, you come about. And if you consistently focus on the lack of responsibility, does this make you irresponsible? So if you focus on the lack of responsibility, on politicians, on the environment, on your competition, on your peers, and your family or your friends or anybody else or anything else that's on that list that you have, you may not have ripped up yet, but hopefully by the end of today you will. Are you being irresponsible? I don't know. Just asking, are you? So Is that an indication, if so, that you are not fulfilling your own responsibility? So if that is the case, is that an indication that you're not fulfilling your own responsibility? And again, in my opinion, you are responsible for anything and everything that goes on in your life. Now, you will meet people, again, who will feel like they are responsible for keeping an eye on everybody and everything. And sometimes you might fall into that trap. That is your job to keep an eye for what's going on in the world. And so, and not only that, when you meet these people, they usually feel they have to keep an eye and responsible for that so they can share with people or gossip. Did I say that word out loud? Yeah.
We got you on record now, Pat.
Yeah. They may gossip. Don't be that person. That, in my opinion, is being irresponsible, because it's not going to have a positive effect on anybody or anything. Is this making sense for you, Pete, so far?
Absolutely.
You want me to? Yeah.
I've a little sort of point there, and you touched on it really in terms of taking on responsibility that maybe isn't yours, and I suppose dealing maybe with the potentially the negative polarity of it, in terms of saying, well, I feel responsible for something that happened, or I feel responsible, I'm a responsible adult, or I'm responsible for my kids, or I'm responsible at work. And that's not necessarily voluntary responsibility as such. It's induced. And I'm just wondering, in terms of your thought process, in terms of how you approach that, or what your take is on it is.
Well, I guess the simplest way for me to say that is I am responsible for the responses to my communication, right? And when something comes back at me in that sense, and I got to look at it, and there are certain things that I may have said in the past which would make me responsible for hurting somebody's feelings, for instance. And I can hold my hands up to that. I can hold my hands up and go, yes, and it was not my intention, and I can apologize and make retribution for the mistakes I've made. And then, in my opinion, that should be enough. It's done. You're responsible for how you, well, actually for kids, I feel responsible for my kids and how I teach them and how I guide them. But when they come into adulthood, I believe they're now responsible for their own decisions, their own choices. And ironically, one of my sons, I won't say which one, because I don't want ever to watch back and say, oh, is that me you're talking about? But one of my sons came to me and decided he wanted to leave school. 16 years of age, leaving school. And of course, I have to give thanks to Brian Tracy for that, because he happened to have dinner with Brian Tracy, and he was 14, and Brian said, Pat, take him out of school and teach him how to make money. He says, you done it, right? But so I thought about it, okay, and I tried to have a conversation. And of course, being a 16-year-old, he wants to challenge dad, right? And and sometimes when people don't hear what they like, they tend to respond in a way that they want to create pain. So he said one or two things weren't too kind. No, they weren't that bad, but they weren't too kind, right? Because he's challenging, right? They test the water. Anybody who has teenagers will understand this. So I said, I tell you what, here's what I want you to understand. Before we go any further, before you say any more now, before you say any more, I want you to think of the consequence, the outcome, because there's going to be a consequence to everything. And I also said, when most people, I say most people very loosely, but most people reach the age of around 6 years old, they know the difference between right and wrong. They have a very good understanding of what's right and what's wrong. So therefore, any choice they make after that, they choose a consequence. If they choose to do something wrong, they know that the likelihood is there will be a not good consequence for doing something wrong or making a bad decision. And you also know the truth for the opposite. You make a good choice and make a good decision, then you're choosing good consequences and good outcomes. Now, again, when we start looking at how we've been programmed, most people have been programmed or conditioned to behave or believe certain things. Sometimes, we react. Okay, and we live in a reactive world where most people react to what's going on. Just like when I talked about people blaming in the blame game, blaming politicians, blaming teachers, blaming bosses, blaming all these people. That's a reactive place to live in. So what we have to do is raise our level of consciousness and level of awareness in terms of our responsibility and how we react also. Because if I say something bad to you, Pete, that's not me, that's not my intention ever. But it may be a response or reaction to something that has come up or has been said. And I may regret it. But I'm responsible now for my feelings. And respectfully, you're responsible for how you feel about what I say to you. Whether it's true or untrue, doesn't matter. You're responsible. Now, kids will feel it, but you know what? Kids actually get it over faster than you imagine. I see kids that, I see Ashton sometimes in friends, he's really friends, and they're trading Pokemon cards or Match Attacks cards, right? And then there's, oh, he done this and he said that and there's all, right? And and I'm not speaking to him anymore. And next thing, 5 minutes later, they're back trading again and playing. They don't hold grudges as much as adults. So adults need to stop teaching them how to hold grudges, right? Because you're responsible for how you educate children, sure. But again, they'll only take from you what they see you doing and how you behave. So if I say something, Peter, and if I say something to hurt your feelings and I'm apologetic about it, and I'm truly apologetic about it, then after that, it's up to you how you receive it. You want to carry the grudge, that's your choice. It's nothing to do with me. In my opinion, if I'm honest and true about it and I've made the apology and I make an honest and true apology, then I've just taken responsibility for my actions and how I'm going to let it affect me. What I say to people is, listen, most people I know have been around beating themselves with a stick for a long time about the mistakes they made. Okay, when you make retribution, don't give the stick to somebody else to beat you with. Right? So you are responsible. So yes, when you take responsibility and you become responsible, and I'm able to go to you now and say, Pete, I apologize. That was not my intention. And I would be hopeful that it doesn't affect you in any way, shape, or form in a negative way, but I truly apologize. Now it's entirely up to you. I'm not going to accept that every time I meet Pete, Pete goes, oh yeah, Pat, remember you said that to me? And I said, listen, honestly, I'm not responsible for how you feel anymore. That's your choice. I've had a lot of things happen to me, Pete, in the past. A lot of not so nice things happen too. I could look back on my life, and when I share my story, I could look back on my life, and some people used to say to me, I remember only a couple of years ago, somebody said, "My God, you have such a tough story. You had such a tough life," and I go, "Is that what I've translated? Because my story is not a sad story at all. Actually, I had a wonderful life. I've loved my life. Have I had a lot of bad stuff happen? Absolutely. But you know what? I choose to focus on the good stuff. I choose to focus on the things I enjoyed. I can tell my story now without feeling pain. I can tell my story because it will resonate with people, to give them hope. I choose to use my story to give people hope because I'm responsible for how I translate my message and how it's going to be received. So my story I share is about giving people hope and letting them see that they have the ability to respond to anything that goes on in their life. They have the ability to choose their outcomes. So my story is not a sad story. And when I know, and I can look back and I go, we could back, like I said, back to that list. You can say, yeah, but my dad could have done, he could have got a job, he could have done this, and we could have got a better house and a better place. We could have. That's nothing to do with me. What matters to me right now is what I do right now with the information I have. So I choose not to blame other people for my choices. I choose not to blame anybody for my circumstance because it's up to me. If it's to be, it is up to me. Now, again, when we accept personal responsibility, because I believe that's what we're talking about now, is personal responsibility. This means that you have to accept 100% responsibility for a number of things. One, your choices and the consequences to your choices, because every choice has a consequence. Consequences, by the way, can be good consequences. I choose the best consequences as often as I possibly can. You can choose to be responsible for your behaviors. How do you behave? You choose responsibility for your health and well-being, for your self-esteem. Now, I know there are people who are in environments that are not good for self-esteem, but you have the ability to choose to change that too. You have the ability to take 100% responsibility for your happiness, your character defects, your imperfections. Most people have them, but you have to choose your responsibilities. You can also take 100% responsibility for your childhood wounds, the things that pain from your past. You can take responsibility for your unresolved losses. Sometimes just walk away and let it go. You can accept 100% responsibility for the problems you're going to face. And you can also choose to accept 100% responsibility for being the best version of yourself. So in order to accept personal responsibility, you must work on developing certain habits and abilities, such as not blaming others for your choices, your mistakes, or your failures. Not expecting others to do for you what you can do or learn to do for yourself. Not allowing yourself to get stuck in self-pity for the bad things that have happened to you. We understand the bad things have happened, by the way. It's not about not misunderstanding it, not understanding it. But you can choose to not allow yourself to get caught up in that self-pity. Because let me tell you, if you do, you could find yourself out there with a lot of competition. Because when you find yourself in that space, here's what I've seen happen. Really? You think that's bad? Wait until I tell you what happened to me. You think you have a tough life? And all of a sudden you'll find yourself going down a rabbit hole that you don't want to go down. So again, you have to work on developing certain habits and abilities, like not allowing yourself to feel over-responsible for the problems of others. And this is a big one. This is a big one, because if you meet people who have really long lists, they're happy to make you feel responsible for their problems too, especially if you made a mistake, or especially if you stepped up and started doing something and they say, well, you didn't give me a chance, you kind of ran off with it, and you didn't give me a chance. And if you just waited a little bit longer, I probably would have been successful too. If you just waited another 18 years, I would eventually have taken action. And most people I know feel responsible for the problems of others. And it's not your responsibility. And again, the other thing that you're going to develop certain habits and abilities are not allowing yourself to become abused, manipulated, or mistreated. Because let me tell you, most people will manipulate you, maybe not intentionally, by the way, but manipulation is very, in my opinion, it's being used on a day-to-day basis multiple times a day, and some people are experts at it and they don't even know it. But you have to choose not to be manipulated and accept all your wins, all the things that you've achieved, and accept them, and accept them with an open heart, an open mind, with love and willingness to enjoy your life and to be allowing yourself to be rewarded without any judgment. So in addition, you must always also learn to do a number of other things. One, ask for help when you can't solve a problem or overcome a bad habit by yourself. when you're taking responsibility, sometimes you may have to ask for help. You have to allow yourself to be responsible, because some people, again, don't confuse the two. When people go, well, I have to be responsible for all of my actions, I have to be responsible, I have to find the answer. Well, you can find the answer by asking for help. So maybe you want to get yourself into the good habit of asking for help when you can't solve a problem or overcome a bad habit by yourself. 2 is be open to new ways of understanding yourself, understanding others, and understanding life. So be open to new ways. This was a big learning for me, I gotta admit. You know, one of my greatest learnings, and you'll be glad to know, Pete, as well. Here, it's in here in the draft of my book. Okay, so that's just for anybody who wonders, am I really writing the book? There you go. It's all here. Okay, it's all
good
here.
To see it.
Right. But one of the biggest lessons for me was being prepared to change my beliefs. Being prepared to change my beliefs, which meant being open to new ways of understanding myself, understanding others, and understanding life. And I knew I was responsible because I have the ability to respond to that. I'm able to change. I'm able to be open to new ways. The third thing was to identify and address any problems in your life. Now, when I talk about identifying it and addressing it, I'm not one of those people. I don't believe in lingering there and staying there. You know, I will look at and address a problem and deal with it. And I know whatever way I choose to deal with it or not to deal with it, then I'm responsible for the outcomes. The next thing is to identify and correct any destructive or self-destructive patterns of behavior. So if I'm going to take control and be responsible, I need to identify and correct any destructive or self-destructive patterns of behavior. The next thing I need to do is develop a caring, loving attitude towards your own imperfections, even as you work on correcting them. And I think this is really important, because so many people, when they're trying to correct them, they keep focusing on the problem. They keep beating themselves up, and they still, again, back to that place of judgment. So when you are changing and correcting your imperfections, and most people have imperfections, believe it or not, right? You got to do it with a loving and a caring attitude. Knowing that you're going through change, knowing you've accepted it already, that's been part of being responsible. Knowing that maybe you're not getting there as quick as you can, maybe you haven't found a solution, but you gotta, you know, share a little bit of love for yourself here and a little bit of care for yourself when you're on that journey, and congratulate yourself just for even recognizing there's an imperfection that you need to change while you're looking for the answer. Don't become frustrated and beat yourself up because you haven't found the answer just yet, because this will change how you move forward, and probably at the pace that you move forward as well. So share yourself a little bit of love and care when you're on that journey, because that, again, is you're responsible for how you feel. And I choose to, you know what, yeah, I'm trying to learn something here. Sometimes it's a bit frustrating, but sure, look, I'm going to enjoy it. And at the same time, I'm loving it. I'm congratulating myself. I'm proud of myself because I've taken the decision to find out a way to change this imperfection or change this habit. So, and again, the next one is accept that no one, absolutely no one, can make you happy but yourself. If you take responsibility for your happiness, doesn't matter what's going on in life, you still have a choice to smile and to see the best in everything, regardless of what's going on. And I understand, by the way, that it's not easy all of the time, but there is nobody or nothing else responsible for your happiness. Always consider the long-term consequence of every choice. Now, this is something I teach, and I really try to get people to understand. There's a long-term consequence. Sometimes you'll hear me use the term short-term pain for long-term gain. when I see a huge amount of people, I mean, most people, and I mean this respectfully, go for the short-term gain, but end up with long-term pain. Because if you take a shortcut, if you're looking for a shortcut, if it's too good to be true, it probably is, right? If you're looking for a shortcut through life and you're trying to cheat your way through life, then it isn't amazing how, you know, people, maybe you know people that 20 years later, they're still telling you they're on the next shortcut. I'm going to get there. Whereas if they allow themselves to think about the long-term consequences and really got involved in being responsible 20 years previously, they probably would have achieved more than anything they ever set out to achieve in their lives. So always consider the long-term consequence of every choice. Now, here's one that's difficult for other people. Most people take full responsibility for the part that you play in relationship problems. You have to ask yourself honestly, whatever's going wrong in your life, and everything is a relationship. Everything. You have a relationship with everything. You just got a relationship with the body you have. Eventually, that relationship is going to come to an end, by the way, just in case you didn't know. So you have a responsibility to play full out, I believe, once you have it and enjoy it. But if things are not going the way you want them to go, you have to ask yourself, what am I contributing here to this relationship? If it's not moving in the direction, if I'm not coming to a resolution, if I'm not trying to find a way, then what am I contributing here? This is about being responsible, taking responsibility for your everyday actions. What am I contributing? Is what I'm contributing in a positive way, is it contributing to the problem or is it contributing to the solution? What part are you playing? You have to answer that honestly for yourself. Now, you can choose that relationship must come to an end if it's never going to come to that resolution. That's still a consequence. That's a long-term consequence too. But it's also a long-term consequence to stay there if it's not working. But it's ultimately always your choice. Always. You must learn to be true to yourself by living according to your values, your needs, and priorities, rather than by people pleasing. I meet a lot of people who spend their life people pleasing and live a dissatisfied life and wonder why. And because they're made feel responsible, whether it's through guilt or whether for whatever reason it is, there are some people who are masters at making you feel responsible for them. But you're not. Everybody is responsible for themselves. We understand that there are certain people who need help. They may need help, and you have a choice whether you want to be responsible for that or not. And if you choose to be responsible for doing that, then you have to be responsible for how you feel about it. You must learn to accept that your life is a journey of learning. Your life is a journey of health, and your life is a journey of growth. You must accept that. Now, what I will say, we covered a hell of a lot here today, Pete, I believe. And we'll probably have some questions in a moment, or we'll have a conversation. But I want some people who are going to sit and watch this or listen to this or maybe read this. Seems like there's a hell of a lot going on here. And you may feel overwhelmed by everything that we discussed. You might feel that seems like so much. But I promise you it's not. Because let me tell you something else. The very fact that you've listened to this, that you've been here, and you're paying attention to what we're discussing, actually means you're okay. If you're feeling overwhelmed and you're wondering, oh, what's going to become of me? Let me tell you, the fact that you came on here, that you're listening here, that you're prepared to pay attention, that means you're okay, by the way. I think you need to recognize that, realize that if you're feeling overwhelmed. You have that ability to listen, to pay attention, and recognize what's going on. Because maybe right now is when change is beginning to happen. But you're okay. And I want you to know that you're okay. You've got to look non-judgmentally where you're at right now. If you want to move forward, no judgment. Look at where you're at right now in your life, in all areas, all aspects of your life, without judgment. If you look at this without judgment, And then you may look at some of the habits that you may have formed and can change. Then you're left with a choice. But I promise you this, taking responsibility will help you create a roadmap to a much more fulfilling life. People tell me what they want. People tell me, I would love to have this, and how do I do this? Well, again, I'm going to say to you, look at the habits that you have formed and that you are already taking responsibility for. The good ones, practice them more. Look at them, practice them more. No judgment. You do it at whatever pace you're capable of doing it at. But again, I guarantee you this. I absolutely guarantee you this. That life of fulfillment that you desire so much, taking responsibility will help you create a roadmap towards that. Once you choose to take responsibility for your outcomes, your choices, your decisions, your thoughts, your behaviors, your feelings, you are on track to that fulfilling life that you desire so much. Maybe you're even there. But if you choose to take responsibility, I promise you, everything changes. Is there a price to pay? I hear you thinking. Am I right? Is that what you're thinking?
Mm-hmm.
Is there a price to pay? Everything comes with a price. And that's the consequence. You got to look at that life, the fulfillment that you want. And when you make that choice, what's the consequences of that choice? And if you choose it, then you're responsible for how people reacted. You're not. How you reacted, how you feel about it. You are responsible for that. You're not responsible for how other people think, how other people feel, how they're going to try to make you feel. And again, if you live a fulfilling life, you will inspire others, especially those who probably don't believe in it and believe in you or believe in themselves right now. They eventually will see something different. They will want more of what you have. You will inspire them to change. You may have to make some decisions, and maybe sometimes when you're making these decisions, what you're doing is you're creating change. And when you create change, people change. And some price that you may have to pay. You may have to pay the price of putting time into this and practicing this. You may have to pay the price of feeling embarrassed about saying I'm absolutely outstanding, or feeling embarrassed about saying I love myself, I am truly happy. You may have to pay the price of being challenged, and people go, "Where'd you cop on over that?" Nobody is happy all the time. You may have to pay. That's part of the price you pay. But I can tell you something, it's a price worth paying. But there's a price of not taking responsibility too. And that, in my opinion, costs a hell of a lot more. Your happiness, your life of fulfillment, whatever that means to you, is priceless. You cannot put a price on that.
What is the cost?
The cost? Well, the cost of not living a fulfilled life is quite the opposite, right? It's not living a fulfilled life means misery, maybe unhappiness, and if there's unhappiness, there's unhealthiness. Maybe it's not feeling loved, maybe it's not getting your needs met. And everybody has needs. Everybody has needs. Maybe it's not living a life to your true values, so by not being the best you can be. And maybe the cost is translating that same message to the people who depend on you as children to learn from you. So, that's the cost of not. The cost of doing it means sometimes you're going to let go. Sometimes you're going to have to let go of people. Sometimes you're going to have to change your environment. Sometimes it's going to cost you financially because you're going to get out there and put income into your education to learn things, to find things. Sometimes it's going to be the cost of time. Sometimes you're going to have to say no to certain events that you'd like to go to because you're working on improving your life of fulfillment. Sometimes you're going to upset people because they think you don't care, but we all know you do. So you have to determine. I can't tell you what the cost is going to be for you, but you got to sit there with your own conscience and ask yourself, what's the cost? And are you prepared to pay the price? And even if it's like a short-term pain for a long-term gain. I've had to pay the price many times. Many times. Sometimes when I look back, I will never say that I've any regrets about the prices I paid. Sometimes would I have liked to have done it differently if I knew better? But sure, I didn't know better. So how could I? So what's the point in beating myself up? What's the point? I know the price I'm prepared to pay now. I know what I'm going to do now. I'm very clear about it. But I'm also prepared to change that if something else presents itself that lets me realize, actually, hang on, something I need to change here. Maybe I need to change another belief about something else. And I'm prepared to pay that price. I'm prepared to reach out. I'm prepared to pay the price of asking for help. I'm prepared to pay the price financially to pay for the help if I need it. But I can tell you, there is nothing more expensive than regret. There is nothing more expensive than regret. You can't put a price on that. And there's nothing more rewarding than the price of happiness, whatever that means. Whatever that means. It doesn't have to be financially, but there's always a price to pay. And you've got to say to yourself, whatever it was, whatever that fulfillment, that life of fulfillment is, are you prepared to pay the price? And sometimes it means rolling up your sleeves and doing some hard work and getting involved and getting stuck in. But if the reward is worth it, then you make that choice. You're responsible for that. You can be, do, have anything, and you deserve to be, do, and have anything that you want in this life. Truly deserve it. But you only get it when you show up.
Does responsibility equal power?
The power for who, really? You know, I mean, there's equal power. Well, I have the power to control my life and run my life the way I want to run my life, if you like. You know, and I guess we can look at power in different ways too, and think of what does power really mean, and we'll get different interpretations of what power means. But when it comes to responsibility, I have the power to be responsible. Nobody can take that from me. That's completely mine. Now I can choose to give away some of that power. And if I choose to give away that power, then I'm responsible for what happens if I give away some of my power. I'm responsible because I've given away, I have not taken full control or taken leave of all the choices I make. I've allowed other people to make choices on my behalf. So I'm also responsible for that. So if I'm not, you know, and I don't believe we'll ever be 100% completely in control of our power, if you like, but we should be about 99% there. Because we always have to leave a little room for improvement, right? So we should be about 99% there of maintaining that power to choose what to be responsible for.
And connect for me then responsibility and accountability.
Okay. Well, I have to hold myself accountable for my actions. Therefore, I am responsible for the responses to my actions or the outcomes. And if I hold myself accountable, then really accountability means to me is about holding myself to account for everything I choose to do, for the choices I make, for the actions I decide to do, and the responses to those actions. Then taking responsibility is based on what I'm holding myself accountable for. Do I choose to ignore certain things? Because if I don't hold myself to account, I can play the fool, right? I can say, well, I didn't really know. I wasn't aware that was going on in my life. I wasn't aware that when I set out on this track that all these steps would lead to here, right? And so therefore, am I being responsible by saying that, or am I being irresponsible? Right? So when I gotta look at how I hold myself accountable, I hold myself accountable when I just by what I'm doing here with you right now, people, by what we're doing, the information and knowledge that we're sharing, I hold myself accountable for the choices I'm making and the way I'm thinking and what I'm going to share. And when I think about it, I want to be held to account for me, for myself, not nobody else. I'm not giving permission for anybody to hold me to account for anything, by the way. Otherwise, I'm giving away my responsibility, right? But I welcome other people's feedback and their responses so I can learn more. Now, if I'm really going to hold myself to account, and I'm going to be accountable to Pete Longton by being on here, and Pete come back and ask me questions and challenge me, and I'm not prepared to listen or pay any attention, or I go and I just start denying it, and I start saying, well, actually, Pete, no, it was that silly question you asked me. It's nothing to do with me. Why did you? Then am I going back to that list again, you see? So I'm going to be truly accountable. I'm going to be accountable for my actions, for my decisions, for my choices, for the way I think, the way I speak, what I say, and then what I do. How do I get out and translate it into the world? Physically, mentally, spiritually, emotionally, financially. But I'll hold myself accountable for all my actions because I'm responsible for how I respond to them. I may do something today that may not get the desired result. But if I'm going to hold myself accountable for that, I'm going to check it. I'm going to look at what happened, what went wrong, how do I fix it? Now the responsibility lies with the choices I make, whether I change it or whether I ignore it and allow it to continue. And we all know there are plenty of people. Ironically, I only had a conversation with somebody in the construction industry, so you'll be familiar with this one, where they said, you know, on the scheme of houses and things are going up, they knew it wasn't perfect, but they just said, just keep going. Sure, nobody will notice. Now that's accountability that they have to hold themselves to, and they have made a choice and they're responsible for that choice. You know, and one person said, I'll pretend this conversation didn't happen. So if I didn't know about it, I don't have to hold myself accountable for it. Right? You can't bury your head in the sands if you truly want to live a fulfilled life. Hold yourself to account and then just take responsibility for your responses and the changes that you need to make. And I promise you, it may seem overwhelming, and it's not that difficult. Seems like there's a lot to take in, but they all connect together.
Is responsibility then connected to alignment?
Is it? Yeah, well, I mean, see, responsibility is connected to everything, really, you know, because it's, you know, when we talk about alignment, you're saying, well, I want to align with my values, and I want to, you know, align with the universe, or with my responsibility to the economy right now, you know. But when I talk about alignment and I say I want to align myself with my goals, with my dreams, with my vision, with my values, with the people that are important to me, well, then I'm responsible for my actions, and I'm responsible for how I can't shortcut it if I want to live a truly fulfilled life. Now, you know, when we, and I have to say to myself, if I hold myself responsible, again, I have to tear up the list. If I have that list, how can I be living a life of alignment, right? How can I be connected to life? How can I be connected to me? Because you remember, I am life. And the same to every single person here, you are life. So how can you align yourself with that true being, the person you want to become, being the best you can be, if you choose to shirk your responsibility? Because again, remember, you're in an environment, we're in a world, a universe that will challenge you all the time. It will challenge your beliefs, it will challenge your values. And remember, the diffusion of responsibility, when you're surrounded by more people who are doing more things, you feel, I'm sure it's nothing to do with me, I can step back. I don't have to do anything about that. Well, is that being irresponsible? Is that in alignment with who you truly want to be? So, yeah, I guess the answer is yeah, it is connected to alignment, but it's connected to everything. And by the way, it's, again, I want to reinforce to people, it's not about judgment. You will choose sometimes to not do certain things. You will choose sometimes to behave in certain ways that may not be in alignment with your true values, and it may not have that much of an impact in the world anyway. So don't beat yourself up. And sometimes you will make choices that may appear in the world irresponsible, if you like, in ways, but it may not have a huge effect. And once you recognize it, I mean, this is a journey, remember, guy. This is a journey. This is not a quick fix. This is not about, living that perfectly fulfilled life. No, because I believe that you will always strive to live a more fulfilled life. And I know for me, I will. Right up until the moment that I leave this earth, I will keep striving to live a more fulfilled life, to do more with my life, to do more with the people in my life, to share more of what I learn to the world, and let them make their own choices on how responsible they are to react or not react, or be proactive with the information I share. But I'm going to live a fulfilled life right up until my very last moment. That's my intention. So along the way, I'm sure I'm going to make a few mistakes. Well, that's okay. I can hold my hands up and say, hey, I made a mistake. No, I don't have to beat myself up anymore, right? And I look at, the other side of it is we talk a lot about emotion and how we react to the world. And emotion creates motion, right? It creates movement, and certain people do certain things. And, to be responsible also, for me, means if I can express how I'm feeling, it doesn't mean I have to become what I'm feeling. And there are things that will happen in your life that will make you feel angry, feel frustrated, feel sad, unhappy, miserable, useless, depressed, anxious. And I believe that if we can express it, then we don't have to become it. So if I'm feeling anxious, I could say, Pete, you know what, right now I'm feeling anxious. I'm just feeling anxious. Then I'm not suppressing it anymore. I'm actually letting it out. And I have the responsibility to be responsible, to be able to respond to whatever is creating that. So whatever's going on in the universe, in the world, in my environment that might create that feeling, by sharing it, by getting it out there, means I don't have to become it. So I'm able to respond to it in that way. It just makes sense. So the same with anger. If I'm feeling angry, I'm feeling frustrated, well, just because I'm feeling it, I don't have to become it. But I believe that when people suppress that feeling and they try to take full responsibility for it by keeping it in, then that's an outcome. They're choosing a consequence that eventually they may blow their top. So by saying it, you don't have to become it. Now that doesn't give you permission to pile all your stuff on somebody else either, right? It just means you got to do it with good intent. So Pete, you know what? Right now, I'm not in the form. I'm not feeling up to this. I'm feeling frustrated, and that's okay. It's nothing to do with you, by the way. That's just what I'm feeling. And now that I can express it, I don't have to become it. So that's another form of responsibility. And when you want to looking for alignment in terms of aligning with what it is, whatever it means to your true values, your core values, your needs, the things that you want to be, do, and have. You can take responsibility for absolutely anything. You can also take responsibility for not taking responsibility, right? You can choose to say, you know what, right now, I don't want to take responsibility. I just want to leave it sit there. And when I'm ready, I'll be ready. If there's no judgment, then that's okay too, right? So when I'm ready, I'm ready. You're still choosing, and that's okay. By the way, no judgment. I do encourage people, though, to do something today. What can you do today?
I'm always struck by, and a pause has a purpose. Not making a decision is a decision. There's so many things that actually we say we haven't decided, but we have.
Oh yeah, we've decided that you can't get out of jail that easy, right? And I think when you're talking about a pause, making a decision, actually, it's funny because Donna has spoke about this, and she talks about every decision is made in a moment, and it's usually made in a pause. Okay, and it's a pause and a breath. So this is why we understand the importance of your breath. So, so have you ever jumped off a diving board? Do you swim?
Yeah.
Right. So have you ever jumped off a diving board or off a rock or a cliff?
Sure.
Here's what happens. You get to the edge and you go, and then, boom, that's when you make the decision, that pause. And it's when you jump, you go, you're letting it out, right? It's that pause. It's in the middle of that breath that you make a decision in that pause. So it's the same thing. If you're sitting there right now trying to make a decision, take a breath. And I guarantee you, it's in between taking it in and letting it out, you'll make the decision. Because that moment where you paused is where you make the decision.
I was struck by what you were saying in terms of leaning forward and, the sort of slightly crowd mentality and things like that. And there's actually, you talk about the Pareto principle and 80-20 and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Listening to Jordan Peterson this morning and he was talking, saying it could be even worse than that. It's like, it's the square root. It's not even the 80-20. 80-20 is too much. And when you work the square root upward, you're more or less saying, so at 100 people, you have 10 people that will lean forward. But the scary thing is when you get up to 1,000 people, 31 people will lean forward. And you get up to then 10,000 and it's 316 people lean forward. And it's like, how scary is that? That's not even 80-20 is not true.
Absolutely. The percentages change. You're right. And actually Jordan Peterson is an absolute genius. We could spend 10 lifetimes to get inside that man's mind, to understand what he understands. And but you see, the percentages change as you grow up, as the crowd grows. It's like, even my simplistic way of explaining that, Pete, is, my background in security, right? So we could go to a, let's say, a club, and something goes wrong in the club and something kicks off. There's 50 people in the club. And all of a sudden, when a row or something breaks out, something goes wrong, you'll probably find at least about 20 people get involved, right? Then we could go to a concert, right? We'd have 100,000 people at a concert. And it's amazing, something breaks out, nobody gets involved. Everybody stands back to see who's going to deal with it. And I'm sure it's no different when, actually, I remember quite a few years back, there was a specific job that was being advertised, and the information around the job, the type of person, would have required a very highly skilled person for this particular job. So the job description was created and the advert went out for the job, and it was decided that this person would have to earn over £100,000 a year to be paid for this job. So it was advertised at £96,000 plus bonuses, plus car, and plus for the ideal candidate. 6 weeks of advertising and nobody applied for the job. And now there was a panic because this was a very, very large experiment, if you like, is what was going to be going on, and a very, very large project that needed to be ran. And the people who were involved in driving the project all had their own individual businesses and couldn't commit to time. So it was decided that the same job would be advertised. And this time, with exact same advert, we just put £36,000 salary. And 62 people applied for the job. So, when more you raise the bar, the less people believe they're capable or can be involved and can do it, or, so maybe it's a belief thing. As we go up the numbers to certain people who believe they can make a difference, or some other people believe that somebody else will get that job, or there's always somebody better than me because there's lots of people there. When the reality is, when if you and I'm going to encourage people to keep stepping up, by the way. Keep stepping up. When an opportunity comes your way, reach out and grab it with both hands. Don't sit back and wait. And then just take the responsibility to be able to do whatever it takes. Find out what you need to do and do it. Take responsibility for learning new skills, learning new knowledge. And again, see, Pete, when we get into those numbers there, we can talk about, which could come across, I suppose, like a conspiracy in ways but we do talk about conformity, and we understand how conformity impacts the world. And when you're in that, it's like, and I certainly don't, I actually, the more I think about it, I don't like using the term sheep when we talk about people, right? But you know how to say the sheep follow the sheep. And recently in one of my talks, we were talking about the great game that most people play is follow there, and everybody goes leader. And the reality is, no, they don't. Most people follow the followers. So the bigger the crowd, the bigger the number of followers, right? So everybody looks around, what's everybody doing? Let's go with them. I've seen this when I do a lot of crowd management, and we're trying to get people, we're looking to, to empty out a stadium with 100,000 people. And it's amazing when people get into movement and everybody just falls into line and everybody goes with it. Now, you're taught that from school, right? Get into the line, cross your arms, do this, walk in single file or double or two by two, right? Even goes back as far as the ark, doesn't it? The animals walked in 2 by 2, right? So conformity has been here for such a long, long time. And most people will conform because it's more comfortable. It's much more comfortable. So as you go up in the numbers, you start building the numbers, you'll start recognizing more conformity. And you'll recognize the ones who really, truly take responsibility for their own decisions are the ones who step outside. And they're few and far between, because most people will look at them going, God, I'd love to do what they're doing, but sure, stay in line here, it's a bit more comfortable. They're choosing a consequence and they're responsible for their choices. And as they go on, more people will step out. But it just takes a bit longer for some people.
On the example you gave there in terms of, applying for that role and actually changing the factors, I'm kind of curious to know I'm trying to get this question right, and I'm not sure if I have, but what is the sort of most effective way of actually empowering responsibility?
I believe powerful questions, letting people, asking the right questions so people find that power within themselves. I can't give you responsibility, Pete, for anything. I might try and make you responsible for something, but I can't give you responsibility for anything. But what I can do is I can inspire that belief in you, maybe by asking those powerful questions. Some people may look at you or they may look at me and go, actually, because they've resonated with us and they've connected with us in a way that they feel that, yeah, that's me. We come from a similar background. We come from a similar type of behavior or similar place of learning, that they see that they have the ability in themselves to take responsibility for their own life. So sharing our story is certainly one way of being able to do that and doing what we do on a day-to-day basis. But I believe it's having the ability for people to ask those questions. I mean, something you're a genius at, by the way, is asking those questions, so people can reach deeper and find it themselves. Because you remember, only you can be responsible. Only you can be responsible for anything that goes on in your life, for anything you choose to have, or anything you choose to be. And so how do we translate that to get people to take responsibility? Maybe it's educating them in a way that they can be educated, not speaking at people. It's speaking with people, speaking to people, and allowing people to actually dig deeper and find that inside themselves, that they realize what they're truly capable of being, and then encouraging them to do that, and consistently encouraging people. And this is something that I say to people: please keep encouraging people, keep finding people to do things well, and tell them. They need to hear that, especially now. And I can guarantee you, the more you hear this, the more you feel that, the more responsible you will become. You will take full ownership of that fulfilled life, whatever that is for you. And you will take full ownership and you will take responsibility for the things that you want to have in your life.
I'm curious about and you mentioned slightly in terms of the security industry and your background and almost crowd responsibility, and sometimes when people step forward, or the energy that's given off when an event happens, and there's potentially finger pointing, or do you know what I mean?
There's lots of finger pointing in that. There's lots of that, because you see, you're right. I mean, one single moment can spark a tragedy. right? I mean, one push forward can create a crush of 100,000 people. There's a level of responsibility for me. So when I go in, and again, risk assessment, right? It's about doing due diligence and risk assessment. Risk assessment applies to your life too, and to everything you're doing. So when I go to do a concert, there's 100,000 people. I have to assess the level of risk. So I have to have that place designed out to reduce the level of risk, right? In terms of what's involved. So, I would set certain crash barriers and breakers which literally break up the crowd. So in the event that something goes wrong, I'm reducing the level of risk. I don't have 100,000 people crushing on 100,000 people, right? So, so we have to manage that. So there is a responsibility for me to know what I'm doing, right? And I will feel responsible for the people who are there. Now, that's a different type of responsibility, and that's an assumed responsibility, of course, right? Same, by the way, when it comes to any accident. If you have an accident, a car accident, and people have a payment, a claim or whatever, that's paid out based on the level of responsibility, right? So they might say, well, there's a 50-50 responsibility here, or there might be a 30-40 responsibilities. That's kind of a judgment that's based on assessments, if you like. But I also look at, I go and do an assessment of risk. So if I'm in a concert or a festival like that, because I can tell you when something goes wrong, everybody looks for somebody else to blame, right? Everybody looks for somebody else to blame. And that's why now within that industry, the event controller has to assume responsibility when they sign a contract as an event controller. So the event controller accepts responsibility. Now, if I have a team of people with all my staff, and if one of my staff misbehave or do something out of the way, I can go along and blame them. But the reality is I am responsible. And I accept responsibility for their behavior because they haven't acted in a way that's congruent to the values of the company, etc. And maybe I'm also responsible to make sure that they have an understanding of what's expected of them, the training, etc., etc. So there's a whole process there. But I have to assume responsibility because ultimately I'm the person who's getting rewarded with the bigger paycheck, right? So I have to assume a certain amount of responsibility there. And and again, we're always going to have that, Pete. It'd be a very boring world if we didn't, right? Let's be honest about it, But I can't accept responsibility for their actual behavior, but I can accept responsibility as to how I'm going to deal with it.
That's quite something when you sort of work out the numbers in terms of, and again, it's sort of that Pareto slash, sort of root number of that, where responsibility for all your staff who are responsible for a block of people who are responsible for, all that, and that all comes back. And I just think of any business, that, what is it they say, the buck stops at the top, in terms of,
Yeah.
It goes all the way. So you're responsible for everyone. And part of me also saying, is that a responsibility in itself to actually put all that responsibility on one person, or is someone remunerated to do that, knowing that if it gets hard enough, you will, you're almost paid a high bounty price, and that your head will go.
I was just about to say that's the price you pay, right? The greater the reward, the greater the price. You just got to choose whether you're prepared to pay the price. But again, you're responsible for your diligence, right? So you got to do your due diligence. Remember, you got to choose the consequences. So by creating shortcuts, if something goes wrong, there's going to be a consequence. Right? So it's no different with your life. It's no different with your life, your business, whatever it is you choose to do. You got to choose the consequences. You got to think of the long-term consequence. So therefore, you really got to get involved in the game here and take responsibility for everything and anything, if you really want to live a fulfilled life. And that's the price you pay.
I love it. And Donald O'Leary's put in a comment there, it makes sense, which saying a car was left abandoned for months. Someone put a for sale sign on it and it was stolen within hours. It's
Yeah.
It's great how you change the polarity of it, I suppose, and it actually links back nicely in terms of responsibility. We can see it as a great chore, we could see it as a great privilege. It could be, responsibility to yourselves, responsibility to others.
I personally love responsibility. I really do. I love it. I love the fact that I'm responsible for everything I say here today. I'm also love the fact that I'm responsible. I love the fact that what I'm saying may be responsible for somebody else to change their way of thinking. I'm not responsible for them changing the way they think, but what I've said, I'm responsible. That what I've said is responsible for that. And that's what I love. I love to see how it creates that complete knock-on effect. And and I love the fact. And I don't take kudos for people changing their lives. The information, the knowledge I'm sharing, and their ability to take responsibility, to take that information and apply it to their lives is what creates that. So it's like that domino effect. It'll go on and on and on. And because I chose to be responsible for sharing my message and getting this knowledge, this information out there, is impacting the world in a way beyond what I will ever see. And that excites me. That's why I choose to be responsible every single day, to be the best I can be, so that I can get out there and inspire as many people to be the best they can be by my story, by the words that I share, by, just by impacting people, talking to people, meeting people, something that they've taken away, that they've taken responsibility for. Because I'm not responsible for what you do with this information. But I love the fact that some people will take responsibility and allow themselves to be the best version of themselves. That's why I love it. I absolutely love it. We could talk for 2 days on this one.
I love the strength of your language and the love language there that's coming in terms of all it is. And I sort of struck right back to almost the intention you go in with, and saying that, in terms of taking it back to the think, is it true? Is it helpful? Is it inspirational? I can't read my writing. Needed? Necessary, sorry.
Necessary. I beg your pardon. Sorry.
And kind. So,
yeah.
So that's why I can't read my own scribbles. But I just think that sets a lovely ethos or charge on responsibility, and saying if you're putting responsibility out to yourself and others and the whole aspect in that way, that sets the right energy about it.
Absolutely. So again, before you speak, think. And if we just live by those 5 points and that ethos of responsibility, then I think the world would be a far better place and more people will live an inspired life.
Any closing thoughts?
Do something today. Think of what you can do. Just think of something you can do to take responsibility for you living a fulfilled life. Do that. Just think about it and then do it.
Pat, thank you very much.
Thank you, Pete. Much appreciated.